Hey, and welcome to my channel where I experiment with different materials and techniques. In this video, I'm making a latex hood with bunny ears. This design is heavily inspired by the bunny mask that Ariana Grande wore in the album cover of Dangerous Woman, but as always, I've added my own modifications. At first, when I was researching this hood, I wasn't able to find the name of the original designer, but later I saw this on my Instagram feed, and of course the designer is no other than Atsuko Kuda. Her creations have been worn by many other celebrities as well, like Dita Von Teese, Lady Gaga and Beyoncé, and you can actually buy this exact bunny hood from Atsuko Kuda's website. Since I wanted to try making my own version, I started with these illustrations and really fleshed out what I wanted the hood to look like. At first, I thought I could divide the hood into more intricate patterns like you see in some other latex hoods, but since this hood already has so much going on, I didn't think it was necessary. Therefore, the hood is only divided into 4 separate pieces. I've seen hood patterns with just 2 identical pieces, but I was afraid that 2 might not be enough to accommodate the roundness of my head. However, I've never tried a hood that was made from just 2 pattern pieces, so I could be wrong, and maybe that is something to experiment with in the future. I wanted to be able to pull my own hair through the hood, so I placed a hole at the top. I also decided to make the eye holes round like they are on Ariana's hood, although I usually prefer the cat eye shape when it comes to latex hoods. One major change I made to my design was continuing the hood down the neck. Ariana's hood only covers half of her head and seems to be tied at the back. On closer inspection though, once I was able to find out the original designer and I saw the product picture, the hood might have actually been designed with a chin strap and Ariana has probably just styled it in her own way. In any case, I was afraid that the hood might ride up if I didn't have something securing it under my chin, and I also just personally like this look better. Now, there are quite many approaches when it comes to creating latex hood patterns. Most people probably start with already existing patterns just to get an understanding of how these different flat pieces result in a 3-dimensional garment. However, hoods are one of the trickiest pieces to make because we all have unique faces and a standard fit might not look good on everyone. For those who are looking for a perfectly fitting hood, I highly suggest checking out Katasta Charisma's YouTube channel and his PDF book about drafting hoods to your own measurements. I will be trying a more precise approach in pattern drafting when I decide to make a full hood, but since this is more of a half hood, I thought I could just get the general shape of my head and tweak the patterns from there. First, I'm tying up my hair to the spot I want the hole for my ponytail to be, and then I'm pulling it through the bottom of a plastic bag. I'm taping the plastic bag so that it sits snugly around my head, and then I start wrapping some cling wrap around my head. I wrap it around the areas where the hood will be, and since this design does not cover my nose or my mouth, I can do this relatively safely. If you're going to make a full hood, do not try this method. Once I have a thin layer of the film around my head, I start wrapping some painter's tape on top of it. Try to keep both the cling film and the tape layer thin and as close to your body as possible, so you will get closer measurements and more defined shapes for your final pattern. I know this looks really stupid right now, but just trust the process. Next, you want to grab a pen and start drawing the seams on the tape. You also want to draw the general shape of the eyes and the mouth opening and how that attaches to the neck. These don't have to be too precise because we will be making a mock-up version of the hood first to see how much we need to reduce the pattern so that the latex is tight enough around our face. That will then stretch out the eye and face openings, and then we can see if we want to make any modifications to them. If you have someone to help you, you could ask them to draw a straight vertical line at the back of your head for the zipper, but you can also measure the placement for it once you've removed this wrap. And to remove this, cut along one of the seams, but be careful not to cut your hair or skin. Once you remove the wrap, you want to check that the whole thing is covered in tape. Here I'm also taping the ponytail opening shut and making the hole a bit smaller. Then I'm placing the end of the measuring tape at the front seam and measuring the circumference of my head so I can divide that in half and get the placement for the back zipper. You also need to know the circumference to calculate how much you should reduce from the patterns. All of the hoods I own have been made from 0.25mm latex, but I'm using 0.4mm, and while I usually reduce around 10 to 15% of my starting measurements when working with 0.4mm, I wasn't sure if that would be too uncomfortable for my face, so I started with a 5% reduction instead. That meant that in my case, I didn't really need to remove anything from these patterns as long as I overlapped the pieces by 0.5mm. Then I chose which side I wanted to use from my final patterns, as I would just flip them around to get the pieces for the other side of my face, and once I had cut out the other side, I laid the pieces on some paper and drew the final patterns. As I mentioned earlier, I'm going to start with a mock-up version first to see if I need to do major alterations to the patterns, and for the mock-up I'm using this orange latex because I don't really use it otherwise and I don't want to waste the black latex that I have to import overseas. I transferred the patterns on the latex and cut out the pieces with a very dull rotary cutter. Then I started attaching the pieces together from the side seams. Here you can see that I didn't clean the seams with solvent first, and there's a couple of reasons for that. Firstly, I'm trying to avoid solvent exposure as much as possible, and while I am working in a very well-ventilated area and wearing gloves and a respirator, I still want to work as little as possible with it. According to people who have been making latex clothing commercially for over a decade now, the solvent in the glue itself is enough to vulcanize the latex, and if your seams are very dusty, you could just wipe them down with water. I still use solvent with garments I make for other people, but I avoid using it when making things for myself. Thirdly, this is a mock-up anyway, and the only purpose of this piece is to figure out the fit of the pattern. So here I attached the side seams of the hood using a foam dome under the curvy seam, and while I was gluing I kept flipping over the pieces because the top piece always stretches a bit more than the bottom piece, and if you don't keep flipping the work you might notice that the seams don't align at the bottom. Next I'm attaching the neck portion to the hood pieces. Here you can also see that I spread some glue on both pieces and then set them aside for a while. This allows the solvent to evaporate from the glue, and when you attach your pieces together, the seams don't appear as lumpy as they would if I attached them right away. Once I've attached the seams, I let them rest for a short while, and then I start applying pressure with a roller. Both pressure and time are the most important factors when it comes to the integrity of the seam, so you want to roll the seams very thoroughly and let them cure for several days. Once both of the sides were assembled, I measured how much I had to remove from the back seam to make room for the zipper teeth. Here you can see that I left these two notches to the tops of the back seam. These parts will overlap and the rubberized zipper will be glued partially over the seam as well as attached to both sides of the hood. I've made a video on how to attach a zipper on latex, so check that out if this part seems confusing. After the back was assembled, it was time to join the front seam. I found it easier to do this with the zipper open so I could utilize the dome again. When the glue was cured enough, it was time to check the fit, and oh god, the orange is such a hideous color and I look like a pumpkin, but if you can look past that, I hope you can see that the overall fit was not too bad. I clearly had to do something about the eye holes as they were covering my lower lids, and there was just a bit of wrinkling around the seams so I could reduce the measurements a little bit more for a tighter fit. So I took apart the hood and removed 0.5mm from all the seams. This was pretty easy as I would just cut off the portion that had some glue residue on it, and I would then attach the pieces together with 0.5mm overlap again. And then my rotary cutter just exploded in my hand, which apparently was a sign that I should finally switch to a new blade. I then glued all the pieces together like I had done before, but this time I added a tube to the ponytail opening that I made from 1mm thick latex. I cut out a circular piece of orange latex so I could attach this tube to the hood, and it took me a while to figure out the best way to glue this addition, but I ended up gluing it to the inside of the hood. And once again I tried on the hood. The ponytail opening was maybe a bit too tight to pull my hair through, as the thick latex tube does not have much stretch to it. And I also highly suggest wearing a wig cap under your hood if you have long hair, because it's very difficult to zip it up without getting a bunch of hair in between the teeth. So if we ignore the fact that I look like a wrestler and that orange is not my color, we can clearly see that the fit is so much better compared to the first mock-up. Now the hood is much tighter, and while there's some wrinkling at the front, the overall fit is looking pretty good. I made markings for some small adjustments I still wanted to make, but I was now ready to proceed with the final version of the hood. So I assembled the final pieces together, and while I was gluing the zipper, I thought I could maybe add a panel at the back to protect my hair, but the flap ended up a bit too narrow and the latex itself was too thin for this purpose, as it would get caught in the zipper, so I ended up removing the whole thing. For the ponytail tube, I glued the thicker latex strip on the ponytail opening before attaching the front seam of the hood. This resulted in a nicer finish, but I realized that the seam of the tube is now facing the front, so to avoid that, I should have probably closed the back seam last instead. Now it was time to experiment with the ears. This part scared me quite a lot, and I didn't have high expectations for the end result. Ears in general seem pretty difficult to attach on hoods, and most of the time I've seen pretty small cat ears that are made of thicker latex, which allows them to stand up and retain their shape on their own. Since these bunny ears are quite tall, I was afraid that thicker latex would be too heavy for them to stand up, but I still needed something to support them. I found some plastic-coated garden wire on Amazon that I thought could work for this purpose. The reason I chose plastic-coated wire is that most metals react with latex and can cause the latex to break down, so I was hoping that the plastic coating could prevent that. I measured out some of the wire and left a bit extra at the bottom, as I wasn't sure how to attach these ears yet. I then cut out some strips of latex and applied glue on one side. Once the glue was not wet anymore, I placed the wire in the middle and folded the strip in half. I tried to focus on bringing the sides together without creating any twisting or wrinkles. Now that the wire was enclosed in latex, I was able to attach it to the ears, but since the tips were quite pointy, I cut some notches to the strip to prevent wrinkles. Next part is optional, but I added an extra strip at the back of the ears to sandwich the wire properly. At first I thought about gluing another full-sized earpiece at the back, but I was worried it might make the ear too heavy. Once both of the ears were made, I started figuring out the best way to attach them. At first I folded the bottom to the front and attached it to the hood. I then went over the seam with a strip of latex to secure it, but quickly realized that the backside looked a lot better than the front, so I folded the bottom of the ear to the back instead. Later on I added these rounded strips to cover the seams at the back, as the first strips looked a bit wonky to me. And here is the final result. I think it looks pretty good for my first hood, but I'd like to hear your opinions as well. This style of hood poses some challenges because it does not cover the whole face, so you have to be mindful of how tight you make it. If you make it too loose, it will look like the first mock-up where the seams are bunching up, but if you make it too tight, it will squish your cheeks out in a very unattractive way. I think I was able to find a good middle ground with the reduction. Another challenge is getting the section between your eyes to sit nicely, but that has a lot to do with individual facial features as well. If this was a full hood, the nose part would help to pull that section down a bit, but with a half hood like this, you have to decide how to draft that area to best suit your face. If I was to make this hood again, I would definitely make the ponytail hole even bigger so that I could include hair extensions, because I think this look definitely deserves an extra long and thick ponytail. I'm not entirely happy with how the ears are attached to the hood, and I'm sure better solutions exist. I probably should have made mock-up ears as well, but I didn't have the garden wire at the time and I wanted to get this video out for Easter. However, I'm happy that they stand up and are not flopping around uncontrollably. So let me know in the comments what you think about this hood, and if you like this video, make sure to subscribe to my channel as well. And check out my Instagram. Like I mentioned in my previous videos, I'll be opening a shop soon, so make sure to subscribe if you're interested in buying latex clothing. It's been a slow start, but I should be launching a limited batch of clothing for women and men soon, so stay tuned for that. I hope you enjoyed the video, and as always, thank you for watching and happy crafting!